Good evening, and welcome to the final episode in Leadership Matters, a bi weekly half-hour series aimed at supporting leaders. And I am Dr. Kenroy Burke, your host, leadership coach, and mentor. And this evening, I am excited because we have a very special edition. I'm going to be sharing a couple things with you, very special edition this evening as we celebrate International Leadership Week. Leadership Matters is this week celebrating International Leadership Week. And we believe that there are several things that we can share with you over this week that will be able to enrich your lives. We'll look out on our social media platforms as we share several memes and inspirational messages for you. And on Thursday, we have an extremely special panel discussion with some extremely talented persons who will be sharing their experience and sharing their thoughts on the whole concept of leadership reinvented. This is the theme for the week, leadership reinvented. And we are going to have a wonderful time. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we come a little closer to the end of this podcast. But before we do anything else, let's take a pause for a cause.
Crumbs Bakery, so good, even down to the last crumb.
Again, we want to thank our sponsors for this season 4. As I said, this is the final episode in season 4. We want to thank our sponsors, Crumbs Bakery and Crispy Chicken, for being on board with us and allowing us to be able to share this message, communicate this message to so many of you around the world. Now, this evening, as I said, we are looking a little bit at leadership reinvented. And one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple years, possibly, is that what we know as traditional leadership is under fire. There are several things, obviously, that have happened over the last couple years. One, there's a lot more exposure to information, and persons are watching and looking at other models across the world. But I believe that the global pandemic has also done a lot in pretty much accelerating the whole concept of future leadership. This week, the International Leadership Week is being celebrated under the theme Leadership Reinvented. And there's actually a strong purport that traditional leadership thinking is actually now on the heat over the last 2 years. And obviously, not just because of the global pandemic. But as a result, this week is being pushed, and there's a great anticipation all around the world that persons are going to start to look at different concepts, different models in leadership, because there is a belief, a strong belief, that leadership thinking has to change. One of the things this evening I want to look at is what can we do? What is necessary? What is good? What is this future leadership going to look like in order for us to be able to move into a space where leadership is responding to the needs of its people. Leadership is responding and consistently responding to needs. So I start with a very interesting perspective from a man called Max Weber, who was one of the first persons to define what we know today as traditional leadership. He actually defined 3 leadership styles. He spoke first and foremost about the charismatic leader. He spoke about the bureaucratic leader, and he spoke about the traditional leader. He defined those 3 leaderships styles. Sorry, but traditional leadership was actually defined as a style where power was given to the leader based on the traditions of the past. So it was pretty much inherited power. It was power that because your father was in charge, your father was in charge. Generally, the male would become the next leader. The eldest male would become the next leader. And the thing about that experience is that it did not necessarily demand that you had any kind of leadership experience. It didn't demand that you had any kind of leadership acumen. You pretty much inherited the position. Unfortunately, there's something that is is oftentimes still done even in our public sector, where we know the whole concept of succession planning. Succession planning really and truly is focused on who is next. But sometimes we know that who is next is not necessarily who is qualified to do the job. So it is widely known and it has been traditionalized as a top down kind of leadership. It reflects obviously an authoritarian approach and with someone issuing orders and commands and telling people what to do. It is pretty much based on one central leader who is giving commands to everybody else and not necessarily what we would want to consider in today's context a shared leadership approach. One of the things also that it speaks to, and we have to be able to analyze it in this context, because I don't fault those persons who started with the concept. I don't fault those persons who where it originated. In fact, I want to say this to you, that oftentimes these models are the basis of our principles as we move forward. So we might be looking at it now and looking back at it and thinking to ourselves, oh, it seems so inept and there may be so many challenges with it. But one of the things that we always appreciate is that as much as it may have challenges today, it worked well for them when they were doing it. So it also further speaks obviously to someone exercising a form of leadership that rests obviously on those traditional or customary authority, such as I said to you, lineage or descent. It is being passed down. But modern traditional leadership actually had its origins in the Industrial Revolution, when we had workers who were led by the manager who had total authority. So again, here in Barbados, we are very aware of that type of leadership. We are aware of that type of leadership because of our sugarcane industry and the manufacturing industries. Those are the industries that came as a result of this whole concept of industrial revolution. I like what Kermit Burley says. Kermit Burley is a professor in the information science department at Pennsylvania State University. He actually said that traditional leadership comes with some challenges. New ideas are not always welcome by the traditional leader, as he is usually the source of all new business and ways of operating. And many of us have seen that type of leadership before, where if you kind of like think outside the box, or you bring new ideas, or if you you're the type of person who is an innovator, and you think of something nice and fresh and exciting, and you take it to that leader is very likely to just pull it down, to strip it down, not to necessarily give you the authority and to vest in you that authority to be able to execute the task. Because there is a belief from that traditional leader that everything must start through them. Now, I want to pause and I want to say this. Yes, everything rises and falls on leadership, but not everything rises and falls on one single leader. So that is the difference with the traditional model. The traditional model's approach is really and truly that everything is coming through one leader, one person. He or she is pretty much the font of everything that happens within the organization. And what we find with those kind of models is that it slows down progress. It slows down a whole set of progress. So there's no meeting that you come together, you discuss the matters, you delegate responsibility, you empower people to get the job done. You tell them, go off, get the job done. We're going to report at this time. We're going to report at that time. Give me your timelines. Let me know exactly what you're doing. There's no type of meeting like that. If that person doesn't speak, if that person doesn't communicate or talk or whatever the case is, nothing happens. And only time that something is going to happen is when that person is a central part of it. So the challenge with that kind of model is that without collaboration, obviously the traditional leader then becomes unaware of all of the changes and problems, and he or she is extremely slow to react. So they're slow to react to things that are happening within the organization, but they're also slow to react to market changes and dynamics. So because it is only them, they only have two eyes, two ears. So they can't hear everything, they can't see everything. And as a result, they slow down a whole set of the process. That traditional leader also has a tendency, obviously, to have a frequent turnover among his team. because the team doesn't feel empowered. The team doesn't feel as though they are part and parcel of what is happening. So you will find that there's a high turnover. They're changing out. Several persons drop out of the process. Interestingly, you may have a case where some may not necessarily drop out of the process, but they're still part of the team on paper, but they're not necessarily executing the way that they would want to. So employees actually grow extremely frustrated at not having obviously the ability to give that kind of input into their work. And they leave. They leave for better opportunities. They leave when a whole lot of better opportunities start to arise. And this listeners actually happens to be one of the main challenges with traditional leadership. I believe that, as I said to you earlier, it is under fire. It is now being questioned by a whole set of persons. And as generations change, and we know that we are obviously in a totally different generation, this Z generation is extremely difficult to please. So what is happening is that you will not be able to do things anymore in that traditional bureaucratic down kind of top down approach, and not have them question, not have them ask questions, not have them feel as though they need to be able to make their input. You're dealing with a whole lot more creatives. So creatives usually come with their own ideas and their own analysis and their own perspective on things. Yes, there is a place where they still need to be able to recognize, okay, I'm going to have to fall into line with what is required. But you're going to find that it is a totally different experience. So before we go any further, I want to pause for another cause. But when we come back, we're going to look at the whole concept of reinventing. So welcome back. Now, as I said to you, as we come back, we're going to look at the whole concept now of reinventing, and I believe that there is obviously a need for us to reinvent the way we do leadership, even if we did not want to prior to this whole COVID pandemic. I believe that the COVID pandemic has shifted a whole set of things. And because of that shifting, what is occurring right now is that there's a need for us to be able to the buzzword today. And I think many of you are hearing this buzzword, the whole concept of pivoting. To pivot simply means to be able to respond quickly to what is happening around you, to be able to use the resources that you have to be able to fill the shortfall that you will eventually have because of your of the changes that are made. So there's a guy called Bruce Avolio. Avolio is his name. He's an American academic, and he interestingly said this. He argues that traditional leaders face multiple challenges. He said that unfortunately there's a millennial workforce that they're forced to respond to, and he said as a result, emotional intelligence, security, a concept that he calls e-leadership. And I love that concept, e-leadership. I think that several of us now are experiencing what we would want to consider e-leadership because your work purposes are working from home and we're using technology to be able to communicate on a daily basis. So he said, we're faced obviously with emotional intelligence issues, security, e-leadership. He talks about also the virtual work environments and globalization. And finally, he also speaks to the role of women. He said that traditional leaders that were faced with all of these challenges, unfortunately, they're forced to respond. So another person, Hamakan, Hamakan actually says it, and I love how he says it. He says that he believes that has been a case that traditional leadership has been long overdue for reinvention. And he further opines that effective leadership skills are based on four things. And I'm going to share those four things with you. He says four things. effective leadership skills are based on. He said empathy. Now, you know that I've been talking about empathy for a while. The whole fact that I'm not just feeling for you, but I'm also feeling with you as you go through challenges. This has become one of the most interesting periods. It is almost like every single day is something new, something fresh. It is a totally different season. It is interesting beyond measure. Persons are under severe challenges, mental health issues and stress, etc. They're under some severe challenges. For leaders, we have to check in, we have to know what's going on with people, we have to constantly be keeping them in mind because they are forced to navigate spaces that they've never ever navigated before. So empathy becomes extremely critical. How do I know that you're empathetic? Not because you walk around pretending that you are feeling for people, or pretending that you are nice, or pretending or giving a false call and how are you doing just to find out about people's business. But I know that you are empathetic when I start to see you doing things within the workplace that make a difference in the life of that person. Persons who do things in the workplace to make a difference are those who are counted as empathetic. So when you change schedules to be able to accommodate people, when you appreciate that, say for instance, we just went through long periods of shutdown, and then we had a curfew that was at 9 o'clock, and some people would still force persons to work until say um 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. Those kind of things show that you're not really interested in your people. Those things show that you don't have that kind of empathy that is necessary. But then on the other hand, you have persons who create a shuttle system and make sure that their persons get home. They're persons who have shuttle systems to ensure that they're brought to work and then they're taken back home in a safe environment. Those are the kind of things that we think. Not just picking up the phone and calling, because I can pick up the phone and I can call and it still does not really equate to what we would want to call true leadership empathy. But then he also spoke about this thing called servitude. And I think that when we hear servitude, oftentimes we think of being a slave to someone. But no, he's talking about the ability to not just be served, but to also serve those that follow you. So leaders need to understand the importance then of servant leadership, being able to serve those persons that follow. Because at the end of the day, I always say this, leadership is really about people. So the main focus must be to focus on those persons. He also spoke about diversity. And we all know diversity in several different ways, diversity can be expressed. But from the perspective that we're getting a collaboration of views, ideas, we're getting a collaboration, we're getting what we would want to call the team approach. We're bringing other voices in the room, we're bringing other ideas and brilliant minds in the room. We are not doing it on our own. But the diversity also comes to light when you can look across the leadership spectrum of any organization and you can note that there are young persons there, not just the older traditional, but there are young persons in that room. There are women in that room. There are persons who may be necessarily at the highest level in the organization academically, but then you also have those persons who have several years of institutional knowledge also in that room. The beautiful thing about it is that diversity allows you the opportunity to have a brilliant, beautiful end product. And finally, innovation. If there's one thing that this period has allowed us to be able to experience is innovation. There are some persons who've been forced into that space because unfortunately what they would have been doing could no longer respond to the market need, and as a result they had to shut everything down and start fresh. So some persons had to do that. There was a whole set of disruptive changes that took place that caused a whole set of people to rethink what they were doing, to totally rethink what they were doing. I believe that this is a season of rethinking, and you've got to pause oftentimes to rethink, because if you think about it, quote unquote, you'll start to recognize that a whole lot of what we do sometimes no longer fits. We just do it out of traditions, etc. So innovation then. So those four things again, he spoke to empathy, he spoke to servitude, he spoke to diversity, and he spoke to innovation. We're going to pause again for another cause, but when we return, we're going to look at then what we consider to be the future of leadership.
Here's some of your best news since the lockdowns. 7 Crumbs Bakery locations are now open on Sundays and bank holidays from 7 in the morning. They are Eagle Hall, Wildy, Fairchild Street, Oystons, My Lord's Hills, Pikestown and Fairview, while the other 10 Crumbs locations open Monday to Saturday as usual. Crumbs for a wide variety of fresh cakes, pastries and bread. Crumbs, so good, even down to the last crumb.
Okay, Crumbs, again, we want to say thank you to our sponsors, Crumbs Bakeries and Crispy Chicken, who've been on board with us for the last 2 seasons. And we are extremely appreciative of all that Mr. Todd and his team are doing over there at those two wonderful establishments. So, as I said to you, we want to close off now as we delve a little bit into what we would want to consider future leadership. Now, one of the first statements that I'm going to make to you is kind of an interesting statement, but I strongly believe, that successful leaders in the future will be great facilitators in a virtual world. So, before leadership, as I said to you, was about giving orders, telling you what to do, go do it, give a command, and you're expected to go off and do that. Today, it is a totally different repackaged thing. Leaders now, successful leaders now are facilitators. Why? Because they have all of the knowledge, all of the expertise, and oftentimes all of the experience that they need in that room already. So, really and truly, their task is not necessarily to go in and to try to do, but their task is really to go in and to try to ensure that those persons who are tasked with the responsibilities can do their job effectively. So, leaders then become facilitators. I know that this is a totally different concept for several persons because over the time we have grown accustomed to leaders who quote unquote get their hands dirty. And we believe that if somebody is to be a good leader, they must get their hands dirty, they must get into the grind and they must go into the trenches and we speak in those terms. But what we don't recognize is that those persons oftentimes, as they get their hands dirty and they get into the trenches, it slows down vision and direction for the organization. Because when I become so operational and I become so bogged down with the everyday doing chores and things like that, and I don't empower people to do those, what will happen is that I don't have enough time then to be able to sit down and to cast vision for the organization, to seek new direction, to create new strategic partnerships. And so my time is spent doing, getting my hands dirty, and not necessarily a extremely reflective, visioning for the organization. So that whole concept then will mean that we're going to have to trust autonomy and independence. We are going to be forced to allow persons to become a lot more responsible for what they're doing. And that will be the case because future generations of employees now are going to be expected to be treated like leaders, not just like followers, not just like persons, not just like human capital. They're going to be expected to be treated like leaders. Sorry. So it means then that we're going to be forced to put a whole set of things in place that ensures that these persons are the leaders of the future also. This style, obviously, I guess everybody could appreciate that this style is a style that the new and the younger generation embraces. They want to feel empowered. They want to feel as though they're part of the process. They don't just like orders. They want to be very much a part of the process. But this leader is also going to be expected to be working remotely with remote teams, even if not necessarily quote unquote in a virtual world, but managing teams across the world because now the entire scope of this world is opening up. So working from home, obviously, we know has become an extremely strong part of what we do today. It's also going to mean that we are going to be managing those persons as we work from our workspaces. Yeah, there obviously is a robust redefinition of what we call leadership success factors. Before, leadership success factors was all about the bottom dollar. So what we thought about was just the bottom dollar. But today now we are moving into a totally different dynamic where people become the priority. So it's people over profit. Can I say that again? It's people over profit in leadership roles. Now the manager may be able to get away with demanding bottom line. They'll just let me get the figures in. But the leader is the person who has to step into a space and understand that my focus is the people, not just the profit. I want to develop a strong team moving forward. So the organization in the future then will train individuals to redefine and understand what success really looks like, what it means and really looks like. Leaders, therefore, will obviously have to be what we would want to consider success factor role models. So they must look the part. They must be in a space where they are the part. So then again, let's go back to it. Some key commonalities, things that are going to be important: emotional intelligence, empathy, learning agility, strategic thinking, resilience. All of these are going to be expected to be seen first and foremost, obviously, in the leader. But then the leader is going to be developing his team, his or her team, to the place where these key factors are also seen in their lives. The third thing that I would want to say to you, and I can't believe the time is going so quickly, but the third thing that I would want to say to you is there is going to be a high level of collaboration. Collaboration is actually going to be the way we do a lot of things and we accomplish a lot of tasks. But it is interesting that it's not going to be just collaboration within our organizations. We've already seen it where now there's collaboration across organizations. The whole concept, as I said to you a little earlier, about shared leadership. Shared leadership is going to be of high priority to our organizations. And because it is such high priority to organizations, you're going to find that people and organizations are going to be repositioned and repurposed to get the job done from a shared leadership perspective and not from an individual person's perspective. This means obviously the ability to bring out obviously the best in people, working with them and not obviously focus on working against them. So the leader's responsibility is to work for them and not just against them. So you're going to start to see a totally different dynamic. And finally, one of the things that I would want to say is there is going to obviously be an increasing importance on something that we call neuro leadership. So you might wonder to me, what is neuro leadership? What are you talking about? Now, leaders will be obviously expected to understand their colleagues. Now, not just receive information, but also to understand. To understand. So the organization of the future is not just focused on communicating, but also on comprehending. Can I say that again? The organization of the future is not just focused on communicating, but also on comprehending. So I'm not just about sharing message, but I want to know what's happening with you. I want to understand the colleagues that you're working with. So leaders are gonna be forced to understand the whole dynamic of the human brain and personality theories and all of those kind of things, because those things will matter in the environment. It's going to be critical then for leaders to be informed about why people act the way they do, and not just the fact that people act. So this is the future of leadership. Totally different space, great facilitators in a virtual world. Obviously, we know that there's going to be a high need for what we call the redefinition of success factors. There's going to be lots of collaboration, and then the whole concept of neuro leadership. I strongly believe that this week is going to be an extremely insightful week for us as people around the world start to talk about leadership and the future of it. But I believe that reinventing leadership is possible. And if we are to reposition our organizations for success, it's really and truly a non-negotiable. As we close this program this evening, for the very final time for the year, I want to say thank you to all those who have joined us throughout this season 4, the entire year, but through this season 4 to be a part of Leadership Matters. Join us again sometime in the new year, probably around February, when we launch season 5. We are thankful for your support, and we encourage you to go to our Facebook page, Leadership Matters 246. Go to our virtual platforms over there on Instagram. Go to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is full of loads of information, lots of interviews, and solid information as we continue to build together in this leadership environment. God bless you, and do have a wonderful holiday season.